Welcome into MMA Weigh-In, where we're breaking down UFC 223 Saturday, April 7th, 10 p.m. Eastern from Brooklyn, New York in the Barclays Center. According to the best MMA odds maker in the world, the craziest 24 hours of MMA history, he's Matt Holt, VP at CG Technology. Follow him on Twitter at Matthew Holt VP. We picked a crazy week to start off the show, Matt. What's on your mind, buddy?
Oh my goodness, I don't even know where to start. So, I guess we should start for those who aren't completely familiar with this whole saga of how it started here. This was supposed to be Tony Ferguson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov for the lightweight title, for Conor McGregor's lightweight title, as they were stripping Conor, as he hasn't fought since November 2016. Then Tony Ferguson, in a freak accident, trips over a cord at a media event, messes up his knee. He can't fight. Max Holloway takes the fight on 6 days' notice. A lot of us know he had to drop a huge amount of weight. In fact, his nutritionist, George Larkhart, said it would have been the second biggest weight cut that George Larkhart, a famous nutritionist with MMA and fighters and boxers, said it would have been the second biggest weight cut he ever would have had to have accomplished. So we're building up to the fight. There's a ton of steam around the Max Holloway entrance into it, as you can make a strong case. Max Holloway on a 12-fight win streak with a really fan-friendly fighting style, a lot more popular maybe even than Tony Ferguson. And then he comes in, he can't make weight all of a sudden. And then, of course, 24 hours ago, Conor McGregor and his band of merry thugs stroll in from Ireland, throw a dolly through the bus window, which causes cuts to both Ray Borg, Michael Chiesa. They both have to pull out of the fight. Artem Lobov, who is a team member of Conor's, was part of that merry band of thugs. He ends up getting pulled from the card, I'm sure with his sterling 13-14 record that Lobov has probably made his last appearance in the UFC period. He's likely to get fired. Conor McGregor gets arrested for 3 charges of assault, 1 charge of criminal mischief. And here we are on paper. Just 10 days ago, we were talking about this being the best card on paper of 2018 from both a fan and a betting perspective. And just 24 hours later from yesterday, we're just trying to make sense of the chaos and who's actually left fighting on this card.
Yeah, and Matt, I'll tell you, we have a lot of change on this card. It was actually difficult to prepare for, but something that comes with that is it's difficult for the odds makers as well. So I love the fact that you're co-hosting this show, and we're really getting your opinion from your side of the counter on what's going on with the odds. So as far as what you said, it was a great Cliff Notes version there of the rundown of what happened, starting with just a freak accident, tripping over a wire, and then getting into 3 counts and getting arrested for the biggest star of UFC history. So I guess my question would be, as far as breaking down the odds, we're starting from the top. Anthony Pettis and Khabib, the main event. What are you looking at as far as the odds for a side and the total in this main event?
So one thing that has happened here, if we look back at the odds with Tony Ferguson, Khabib was anywhere from like -240 to -280, maybe creeping up around that $3 mark. And then against Max Holloway, it opened -550, was down to about -475 before the Holloway injury. This one, I think if the fight actually goes on, and it's not 100% confirmed yet, the problem is Anthony Pettis has to make 155 pounds. He weighed in at 155.2 this morning, and the commission there gave him 2 hours to lose the 0.2 of a pound in order to make this a title fight, 5-round main event. So Pettis still has a little work to do to lose the weight to actually confirm that this main event is actually going to be the main event. So while we're taping here, we don't even have 100% confirmation that the Pettis fight is booked as a title fight, is the main event. But let's assume it is, and let's go with the fact that we're probably going to end up somewhere in the -800 to -1100 range on Khabib. And what's interesting here is on paper, you have one of the best takedown wrestlers in the history of MMA in Khabib versus one of the guys with the worst takedown defense in Anthony Pettis. So on paper, it's really a mismatch. And not to mention the fact that Anthony Pettis, former lightweight champion of the world, former cover of the Wheaties box, is 2-4 in his last 6 fights in the UFC and really been struggling. He does have some name value, but not exactly in peak form. The one thing to consider here, though, before firing the whole bankroll on Khabib, assuming that Anthony Pettis has 0 shot, is there has to be some type, or at least to some extent, some mental fatigue, some mental exhaustion on the part of Khabib Nurmagomedov here, who was preparing for Tony Ferguson, had that taken away, finally got his lightweight title shot taken away. Max Holloway steps in. Okay, we're going to save the day. I know how to fight Max. Oh my God, Max is out. Oh, by the way, Conor McGregor and a band of 30 thugs attacked my bus trying to get to me. I mean, this guy has gone through a mentally exhausting week. And thus, because of that, I think the potential for mistakes is also there. And if we want to find an example of this, we have to go back and look no further than Luke Rockhold after he won the middleweight championship. He was supposed to have a rematch with Chris Weidman. It fell through. They were looking for a last-minute opponent, and the only guy to step up to fill in last minute was Michael Bisping. Everybody completely discounted Bisping's chances. The odds went all the way up to -1,300, -1,400 at some places. Bisping with nothing to lose, really. And Bisping was in the same boat as Pettis, a guy who a lot of people thought was kind of shot, would never get a title shot, had missed his opportunities, came in and knocked out Luke Rockhold in the first round because Rockhold just seemed mentally fatigued, unprepared, and unready for the situation. And again, Michael Bisping had nothing to lose, and that's going to be the case for Anthony Pettis here. I mean, 2-4 in his last 6 fights. He's nowhere near the title scene anymore. And he has absolutely nothing to lose. And we don't know to the extent of what has been the mental fatigue and exhaustion of Khabib Nurmagomedov this week.
Yeah, Matt, I mean, it's a good breakdown. We got everybody in the chat box, Craig, Blake, what's up, guys? Mr. Fox in the chat box as well. We're going to be hitting the chat box throughout the show. And guys, we're starting off with the top, running through every fight on the UFC 223 card. That is the basis for the show. But you bring up Anthony Pettis. He's going to be a big underdog. You mentioned in between the -800, -1100 range. And something I've actually learned from you, Matt, over the years, when looking to bet a major underdog, you got to look for a path to victory. Are they going to kind of take over, jiu-jitsu-wise on the ground or be able to knock them out? Do you see a path to victory from Anthony Pettis rather than just kind of mental fatigue from Khabib?
Well, Anthony Pettis in his prime was a dynamic striker. If you go back, he has one of the most famous strikes in the history of the WEC, jumping off the cage to head kick Benson Henderson in the face there in WEC. We saw him finish guys and look really dynamic in the UFC. He had a great fight with Gilbert Melendez. He finished former champion Benson Henderson to win the title. I think one of two things would have to happen here. He has 2 paths to victory. First of all, while he's not a great wrestler and his takedown defense is bad, his submission game up there training at Rufus Sport is actually pretty strong. We saw him put Benson Henderson, another great wrestler and a great armbar, and submit Benson Henderson. So the 2 paths to victory for Anthony Pettis are you catch Khabib coming in because Khabib's going to come right in, go for the takedown. You catch him with a flying knee, a head kick, or a huge punch early, kind of that Hail Mary puncher's chance, and you hurt him and knock him out. The other chance is Khabib hits that early takedown, but in the middle of a scramble, you lock on an armbar or triangle, something real quick, and are able to choke him out. But the one thing to consider here is if you're going to play Anthony Pettis, and I think the under in this fight is going to be a big play either way, it's easier to get those submissions early, and it's easier to hurt someone early when you have your full power. Once Khabib gets Anthony Pettis down and starts hammering away on him, Anthony Pettis is going to get fatigued really quickly, and the chances of a submission victory or a knockout victory really wane very quickly. So if you're going to play Anthony Pettis to win this fight at a huge price, you should also consider playing the under, or Pettis to win in round 1, or Pettis to win by KO or submission as well, and might as well parlay it, because if he's going to win, those fluke knockouts tend to happen early. Look back at the biggest I don't want to call them flukes, but the biggest upsets in UFC history, Matt Serra, one huge right hand against George St. Pierre. Michael Bisping, one huge right hand fluky against Luke Rockhold. The biggest upsets tend to happen early when a guy is at his freshest, and that's probably the case here. If Anthony Pettis is going to pull that monumental upset, it's happening in round one.
Yeah, I like it. You bring out a couple correlated parlays there, and it's the great thing about the sport. Really any fighter can beat any fighter on any given night. Matt, you bring up betting the total. What do you see the total of this one, and do you have a play or a bet on this fight?
Well, it's hard to make a bet right now because A, we don't even have 100% confirmation that the fight is confirmed, and B, we don't know what the real odds are going to be. What is the market going to settle at for a price on this fight? So, look, this is a hard fight to lay here. Again, it might be worth throwing a little shot on some type of correlated parlay. Pettis by KO in round one at 100 to 1 or 70 to 1. $25 makes you a huge price. Because I don't know that I want to lay 1 to 10, 1 to 11 with Khabib this week in a situation where we just don't know to what extent he has any mental focus left in him.
Okay. No, good stuff, man.
I actually feel like Anthony Pettis might have a better chance of beating Khabib Nurmagomedov tomorrow than he would if these two had been announced and fought and trained for each other for 3 months.
Okay. Well, anything else to throw out on the main event before we move down the card?
No, I think that's it really, and hopefully Pettis makes weight, and at least we get a real lightweight champion out of this.
All right. Well, next up we got 115 weight class in the women's division. We got Rose versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk. The American versus the Poland. Looks like Joanna opened -175 at CG Technology, now -110. 3.5 the total, juice towards the over. Heavy money on Rose? Is that something, what you're seeing, sharp money, public money? And what are you thinking about this fight, Matt?
Both. We're seeing sharp and public money here on Rose Namajunas. Look, last year when these two fought and Rose Namajunas pulled that monumental upset, I was actually on Rose, publicly put it out. I was on a different podcast and several shows that week, and I gave out Rose Namajunas at +500 to win that fight. But look, Joanna Jędrzejczyk was -700 in that fight for a reason. The fact that the fight has gone down to a pick'em tends to make me want to lean on the now what is basically almost an underdog here, as I think Rose may actually go off as the favorite. I like Joanna in this fight, and look, styles make fights, and she got caught in the first fight, and maybe she blamed it on a horrible weight cut, and maybe that's true, and maybe it's not, but I do think she's going to come out more focused here. I do think this fight, once it starts standing, is going to really stylistically favor her. Where I think the biggest advantage is betting-wise on this particular fight is on the total. 3.5 rounds, over minus between 125 and 130 right now. And in the first fight, we saw a first-round knockout, and a lot of people are automatically going to assume Rose Namajunas must be this big puncher. That was the first knockout of her entire MMA career. The first knockout she ever had happened against the champion in this huge fluke first-round knockout.
So you could see that happen again. And it's all about value. And sitting here, you bring it up, but about a pick price. I mean, would that make you? Are you putting that as an official bet out, Matt?
Yeah, I'm on. I already played Joanna Jędrzejczyk for 1.5 units. It's one of my better plays on this card. I really like Joanna in this spot, but I also played 1.5 units on the over here. I had to lay $1.25 to make a dollar on the over in this fight, over 3.5 rounds. I'm seeing it vary now between a quarter, over -30, even over -35. But the simple fact in this fight is when Joanna's at her best, when we look at her recent title fights against Jessica Andrade, Carolina Kowalczyk, who's on this card, Claudia Gadelha, her last, 1, 2, 3, 4 wins in a row defending the title have all come by decision. She's more of a volume striker than she is a one-punch knockout artist. And when she tends to use her footwork well, land jabs, land leg kicks, land volume strikes. That's how Joanna dominates fights. It's not big power shots. It's just a lot of shots. and with great technique and great footwork. And I think that's going to be the case here. I think she's going to be on her bicycle early. I think she's going to be moving well. And when we look back at it, Rose Namajunas also had to go deal with some pressure. She was a little shaken up. She was on the bus yesterday. I mean, Rose Namajunas has already lost to Carolina Kowalczyk in her career, someone who Joanna Jędrzejczyk beat. She lost to Carla Esparza, someone who Joanna Jędrzejczyk beat. She lost to Tisha Torres. I mean, Rose parlayed one good win over Michelle Waterson into a title fight, and she took advantage of her opportunity in that title fight. But on paper, Joanna Jędrzejczyk is still the better fighter here. We get the better fighter at a pick'em price and a fight that looks to go the distance. I mean, Joanna Jędrzejczyk has 14 wins. Of those 14 wins, 9 of them come by decision. And her recency bias against really top-level elite fighters when she's defending the title, 4 straight wins by decision. Of course, she had that first-round knockout loss, but that fluke we just talked about, when these big upsets happen, they tend to happen in the first round, a.k.a. Rose Namajunas as well, first-round knockout. This thing gets out of the first round, it's almost assuredly going to go 5 rounds.
All right, good stuff, Matt. Hey, in the chat box, we got Fox saying small bet for me. It's a hard fight to pick, but he's also liking the over as well. Thug Rose for me. Fox is saying we got what next up? We got 145 pounds. Calvin Kattar versus Renato, the Brazilian versus the American, minus 160. You guys open Calvin up now, minus 125, 2.5 the total. Heavy juice towards the over on this total, Matt. What are you seeing in this fight?
Look, and this is another play for me. I'm on Renato Carneiro here. They call him Moicano. Moicano's, it's a lot of times the Brazilians, their nickname ends up being listed as their last name. It's actually Renato Carneiro, Moicano being his nickname, but he's listed as Moicano everywhere here. I'm actually on him here. And one of the real handicapping tools I tend to use when analyzing MMA fights is what has the opponents of a fighter done since. So Renato Moicano Carneiro comes in, gets a fight against top 5 featherweight Jeremy Stephens, goes in there, puts on an unbelievable performance and beats Jeremy Stephens. But since then, if we look at what Jeremy Stephens has done, he's gone on to win 3 fights in a row since then against top-level guys. Doohoo Choi. He just knocked out Josh Emmett in a main event spot in his last fight. So that Carneiro win over Jeremy Stephens is really impressive. That's a top 5 legitimate win over a top 5 guy, something that, Calvin Kattar has never been close to. Look, Calvin Kattar only has 2 fights in the UFC. He was an underdog in both of those fights. Most of his fights, he has an impressive 18-2 record. Most of his fights take place on this regional organization called CES, which is Classic Entertainment Sports, against guys in the New England, Boston, Connecticut area, really with no names. He comes in, he did beat Andre Fili, which was, he's not a ranked guy. He came in as an underdog again to undefeated Shane Burgos in a fight that you could make a case he was losing the first 2 rounds, gets the knockout in the 3rd round to pull off the upset there. But suddenly, after being an underdog 2 fights in a row against lesser competition, he's a favorite over a guy he's stepping up in class against. And I think this is the recency bias. People love that guy who won by knockout. And Calvin Kattar fought on a pay-per-view card. He fought on UFC 220, Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou, which was probably the highest-rated UFC pay-per-view card of this year, and he scored a big knockout on that card. So people go, yeah, I remember that guy. He won by KO on that card. But in reality, look, if he doesn't win by knockout early here, Carneiro, if he can get this fight to the ground, is one of the best Brazilian jiu-jitsu artists in entire MMA right now. 5 of his 11 wins by submission. He's not a big puncher here. And his only loss in his career for Carneiro to Brian Ortega, the undefeated #1 contender in the featherweight division. So that's a legit loss that you can excuse that ended up happening in the 3rd round of a really ultra competitive fight with Ortega. So this guy went nose to nose with the #1 ranked featherweight in the world, Brian Ortega. And he beat Jeremy Stephens, who's a top 3 or 4 featherweight right now. I think a lot of advantages for Carneiro on this fight. Light years of advantages for him on the ground if this thing ends up going to the ground. And Andy's plus money, I actually ended up playing Renato Carneiro here for 1.5 units too at plus 110.
Matt, you make a hell of an argument, man. I didn't have this as a bet yet, but I like it. I think I'm going to throw that one on. Hey, we got 155 pounds, Paul Felder versus Al Iaquinta. Is that how you pronounce it?
Iaquinta.
All right.
Raging out.
Yeah, for sure, man. We got Iaquinta, minus 130. You guys opened it. Now down to minus 125. Doesn't look like much movement. Total 2.5. Juiced a little bit towards the over. And Iaquinta, New York real estate agent now. He's coming out of inactivity to fight this fight. His last fight was about 2 years ago or so. So that creates a lot of questions in my mind. Makes me look towards Paul Felder. What are you thinking about this fight?
Yeah, I do agree with you with the inactivity issue. And what happened to Al Iaquinta is he wasn't getting the money he wanted. He tried to renegotiate his contract with the UFC. It didn't really work out. So then he decided he was going to quit, open his own real estate agency. He has come back for a few hit and miss fights here. He fought Diego Nightmare Sanchez in his last fight, which was basically a year ago at this point, last April. And that was kind of a fight the UFC gave him to showcase him. Diego Sanchez way past his prime at this point. And Al Iaquinta able to get the knockout stoppage in that fight. But he's always been at odds with the UFC. And because of that, he tends to be relatively inactive. To your point, on the other side of this, though, we get a Paul Felder who's been extremely active, while Iaquinta has been averaging a fight a year because he basically is at odds with the UFC and not fully committed to whether he even wants to be a fighter or not, owning that real estate business. Paul Felder has been as active as he's ever been in his entire career. 3 fights in 2016 for Paul Felder, 3 fights in 2017 for Paul Felder, and in 2017 he went 3-0 with 3 knockout victories. You have to love that positive momentum coming into this fight for Paul Felder here. This is a fight I went back and forth with because, like most people who watch Al Iaquinta, I'm an Al Iaquinta fan, and it's hard not to be. He has great hands, power in his punches. He can knock anybody out at any point. He tends to have really exciting fights, but at the end of the day here, I think the value from a betting standpoint lies on Paul Felder, the more active fighter. There's been a long history. When you go back and look at some of the better fighters in UFC, when they went on their better runs, they stayed active. They were fighting multiple times per year. You get a Paul Felder who's fought 6 times in the last 2 years against an Al Iaquinta who's just fought a couple times in the last 2 years. I think all that positive momentum right now with Felder probably means that this fight should be a pick'em at worst, and you're getting plus money at Felder. I like Al Iaquinta's hands, and I like the fact that he's going to put a big effort into fighting in front of his hometown crowd, being from New York. But I'm going to go ahead and make a half-unit play here on Paul Felder at plus money as well.
All right, nice, Matt. I'm joining you. I'm on Paul Felder, official pick, 3-fight win streak. Beat Charles Oliveira last fight. I like that fight a lot, so I'm on Paul plus the points as well. Guys, we got a couple guys in the chat box asking, Ryan saying, asking about another fight, Beck versus Ashlee Evans-Smith. We're going down the whole card, so we'll get to all of the bets. And yeah, we'll recap all the bets at the end, George. Thanks for chiming in on the live chat. Guys, if you're liking the content, please give us a thumbs up. And if you could share on Facebook, retweet on Twitter, we'd appreciate that as well. This is the first show, MMA Weigh-In. Thanks for bearing with us too. The last 24 hours have been crazy. So kind of going down the card with each fight, the main event doesn't even have odds yet up, but we got Matt in saying Khabib should be in between minus 800 and minus 1100 on the main event. Matt, moving down 115-pound weight division in the women's division, we got Carolina versus Felice Herrig, minus 180 Carolina. 2.5 the total. Is this what you guys are really posting at? 2.5 over minus 400?
Yeah, and for good reason here. And okay. I'll be honest with you, if you were looking for a parlay builder, the over in this fight is probably a really strong parlay builder. Look at Carolina Kowalkic, and 8 of her 11 victories have come by decision here. Only 1 knockout, 2 submission victories. Her last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 victories, all by decision. They even set her up with a fight in Poland in her last fight in October against a young lady, Jody Esquibel, who I've never even heard of. It was a fight to make Carolina look good, coming off the loss to Claudia Gadelha. Before that, she lost a title shot to Joanna Jędrzejczyk. She does own a win over current champion Rose Namajunas, but I thought they gave her a great bounce back spot in Poland, and again, she went to decision. She just goes to decision basically every single fight. And on the other side of this too, Felice Herrig, 14 wins, 9 of those by decision, 6 losses, all 6 losses by decision. Felice Herrig, ultra durable, never been stopped. It was hard for me to jump on a side here, right? I wanted to jump on Carolina here because I think physically she's a little bit better than Felice Herrig in every way. And I know Felice, she trains out here in Vegas sometimes. Some of my friends, including Nick Blumgren, are really familiar with her, and they say she's a total gym rat. She lives in the gym. She's in unbelievable shape all the time. She's on the best win streak of her entire career, winning 4 straight fights. But the one thing about those 4 straight fights, and it's important to look because styles make fights here, is she fought strikers. She fought Kaylin Curran, a striker, Alexa Grasso, the Mexican kickboxer. We actually we watched that fight together when I was down there in Costa Rica. She won that fight in an upset against Alexa Grasso. Justine Kish, another kickboxer. Courtney Casey Sanchez had a little bit of wrestling, and Felice Herrig only won by split decision. I think if Carolina gets this fight to the ground, Herrig's going to have a lot of trouble. If she can keep it standing, maybe it's closer to a pick'em. To be honest with you, if this line was minus 160 or less, I could see myself jumping on Carolina. But in order for me to get value on Herrig, I think this line would have to be like Carolina Kowalczyk minus 260 or 280. For me, I'd have to get at least better than 2-1 to jump on Felice Herrig. That's not the case here. I know the total seems really high, but for those kind of guys, and I know there's a lot of them in MMA that love to build parlays, this is one where I might use it if I was looking for a parlay builder, the over in this fight, because both of these women go the distance. Felice Herrig has never been stopped in her entire MMA career, so this one very likely to see the judges' scorecards, but really hard for me to pick a winner, and I'm going to pass.
Okay, and Matt, a question as far as odds making goes. So 2.5 over juiced to minus 400. Why not move that total up to create more kind of betting interest in it instead of having to lay 400, move it to 3.5 and adjust the price on that? Why not do that?
Well, let's start with the fact that it's only a 3-round fight, so it certainly can't go 3.5.
Good call.
Yeah.
I'll take it on the chin for that question. Let's move on to 2 Americans, Joe and Chris. Chris Grits, Joe minus 170. Looks like it was bought up since minus 155. Total 1.5, juice towards the over, minus 180. Anything on this fight, Joe? Or not Joe, Matt?
Yeah, I'm actually going to play a half unit here on Joe Lauzon, but you have to be a little bit careful with what number you get here. This fight opened at 155, and if you shop around, you could still see some 55s, but a lot of books now are up to minus 170 or minus 180. I certainly wouldn't want to lay that. I actually bet a half unit on Joe Lauzon at minus 160 earlier. Look, Joe Lauzon has lost 3 of his last 4 fights, lost 4 of his last 6 fights, but he's also one of the most famous fighters in the history of the UFC. 25 finishes and 27 wins. He owns the record for most post-fight bonuses in the history of the UFC. This is a guy who's never had a boring fight, and he's also fought anybody who's anybody in the UFC. Ally Aquinta, Evan Dunham, Jim Miller, Michael Johnson, Michael Chiesa, who was supposed to be in this card, Anthony Pettis, who's in the main event now of this card. He's fought everyone there is to fight in the lightweight division. And I think this is the UFC actually throwing Joe Lauzon a bone here. Lauzon recently opened his own gym that's really started to flourish. He actually has another fighter on this card from his gym. So he's starting to transition slowly into that trainer/gym kind of phase of his career. But he's only 33 years old. I think he still has a couple of good performances in him. And on the other side of it, Chris Gutzemacher is a guy who You know, he did okay on the regional scene in Arizona here, but he's 1-2 in the UFC. He's lost 2 straight fights in the UFC, both of them by submission to Chaz Skelly and Davi Ramos. And if there's one thing that Joe Lauzon can do, it's wrap you up and finish you with a submission. That's his specialty. And on the other side of it, you have a guy who's extremely vulnerable to submissions. In fact, all 3 of his losses come by submission. Most of those wins in that 13-3 record, again, come on a regional scene against a bunch of guys that nobody's ever heard of. In the UFC against much lesser competition than Joe Lauzon, he's 1-2. And both of the guys that he lost to in his last 2 fights would also both be significant underdogs to Joe Lauzon. So guys that would already be significant underdogs to Joe Lauzon have both submitted Chris Gruetzemacher. This feels like the UFC to me throwing one of their longtime veterans who's given them so many great performances a bone to look good in his own region, in his own backyard. You know, Lauzon from Boston, making the short trip up to New York, is training and cornering one of the guys in the very first fight on the undercard. He's going to have a bunch of fans there, and I feel like this is the UFC throwing him a bone in a fight he's supposed to win. The only problem is a lot of other people, I think, obviously recognize that, and we've gone from 150 to as high as 180 at some places now. I think there's still value at 170 or less, but once you get over 170, I think the value starts to disappear, and that's why even at minus 160, I'm only throwing a half unit.
Matt, we got Kieran in the chat box asking, Grizz will win. He has to, or he will be cut. Joe only has cardio for 1 round. Does that scare you, Joe's cardio?
Look, it's easy to say Joe only has cardio. I disagree with that a little bit. I think that when he's fighting some of the best guys in the world, he does tend to fade. You're right. I mean, let's face it, he against a much more elite level competition like Stephen Ray and Jim Miller and even Al Iaquinta, Joe Lauzon came out kind of on fire early, and he certainly faded against Jim Miller in a fight that was definitely 1 round apiece going into the 3rd. He definitely faded against Stephen Ray in a fight a lot of people thought he won, including me. I thought he certainly won round 1. I thought he won round 2 as well. He lost a majority decision there to Stephen Ray. He certainly has faded in the past, but I'm not sure Gruetzemacher is going to be able to push the pace enough like some of these other guys that I mean, the level of competition by the guys that were able to fatigue Joe Lauzon were all much better than Chris Gruetzemacher.
Matt, we got Beck Rawlings versus Ashlee Evan Smith. I'll tell you, Ashlee Evan Smith gets a lot of pub on social media. Minus 180 for Evan Smith. Is this off the board, or is this fight still going on?
No, this fight's still going on, yeah.
Okay. You guys seeing any significant action one way or the other, and any totals action on this fight?
So this fight's kind of been all over the place. It's a fight that opened around 160, got as high as like minus 240 at one point, back to 190 here. The total on this one is another big over at 2.5 over, almost 400, although I wouldn't be nearly as confident in this one going over. In fact, if I was going to make a flyer on a total at a big price, plus 300, plus 330 that may go under, this is the fight that I might take. Ashlee Evan Smith, 5-3 in her career, 3 out of those 5 wins by knockout. In fact, she's coming in off her last win was by knockout, and in her last fight she lost and got finished in that fight. In fact, 2 of her 3 losses she got finished in. So she tends to be a finishing machine one way or another, Ashlee Evan Smith. You know, one of the problems for me in this fight, and I want to bet Beck Rawlings, but I couldn't quite pull the trigger. You know, both of these women come in onto this fight on multi-fight losing streaks. Obviously, Beck Rawlings' level of competition in that losing streak to Tecia Torres, Paige Van Zandt, and Jessica Rose Clark, much greater than that of Ashlee Evan Smith. But the problem is here you have 2 strikers. And I think that in a striking battle, Ashlee Evan Smith is actually the harder puncher, might be the more active puncher here as well. So I ended up shying away from it. Look, if gun to my head, I think I would take the underdog price here with Beck Rawlings, just because her level of competition has been so much better. But it's one of those things, like if you're fighting a lot better people, but you're losing every time, what does it really mean? So I ended up passing on this fight.
Okay, passing on that one. Matt, we're running up against it time-wise. What we got? Evan Dunham versus Oliver Aubin. Anything on this fight?
Yeah, Olivier Aubin-Mercier. And this is a fight, again, we're losing a little bit of value here with Evan Dunham, but I'm actually looking to bet Evan Dunham in this fight. 5-fight unbeaten streak for Evan Dunham. And look at he had a draw versus Beneil Dariush in his last fight. Evan Dunham's a guy now that's creeping up there in age, 36 years old. So his time at the top of his MMA game is probably coming to an end, but he's actually 5-fight unbeaten streak. And this is a guy who's fought Rafael Dos Anjos, the former lightweight champ, Donald Cowboy Cerrone, Edson Barbosa. His level of competition is awesome. He trains at Extreme Couture. A lot of people thought he beat Beneil Dariush in his last fight. He's a huge 155-pounder. But injuries have derailed his career to the point where he's so inactive, nobody betters. I like Olivier Aubin-Mercier, but 29 years old, he doesn't have good wins over anybody. He has lost to Carlos Diego Ferreira, lost to Chad Laprise. His 3-fight winning streak is over Drew Dober, Tony Martin, Thibault Cody. If you shop around, I think you can get this fight as a pick'em. One guy's a perennial contender who's always been in the bottom kind of top 15 of the rankings in Evan Dunham. Another guy's a prospect who never really made it anywhere near the rankings at a pick'em price. I know that Dunham's 36 years old and has been a little bit inactive, but I like the way he's fighting. I love the way he overcame adversity, almost getting knocked out in the first round against Beneil Dariush in his last. And I'm going to go ahead and lay the very small price for a full unit on Evan Dunham.
All right, we got Al in the chat box saying Pettis would get some real points with the company. Yeah, I'm sure he will, having to step up with this and what Matt thinks around a minus 1,000 favorite in Khabib. Matt, before we start summing up the bets on the card for mainly yourself, I'll throw out a couple as well. Anything else you want to throw out for the fights on this card, prelims wise?
No, I mean, it was a crazy card. You know, I don't know. We have one huge favorite on this card with that Magomed Sharipov. I wouldn't go anywhere near that fight. I think that price is a little bit inflated. That Mikey Rodriguez kid is actually trained by Joe Lauzon. So it'll be interesting to see how, you know, guys from Lauzon's gym, the first fighters that he's actually training that are making it into the UFC, how he does. Devin Clark's been a little bit of a disappointment since joining the UFC. But that's about it. Look, I know this card's been crazy. It's been a chaotic 24 hours, but I still think there's some really good betting opportunities on this card.
All right, good stuff, Matt. I think good first show. Let's sum up the, I guess, the best bets. I'm going to be on Paul Felder, just mainly due to where his head's at of his opponent Al, and also you convinced me on Renato plus price. So 2+ price guys there in the middle of the card. What about you, Matt? Can you sum up your bets for the card?
Sure. I got 1.5 units on former strawweight champion Joanna Jędrzejczyk, 1.5 units on the over 3.5 rounds in that fight at minus 125. I have 1.5 units on Renato Moicano Carneiro as well, half unit on Paul Felder, half unit on Joe Lauzon, and a full unit on Evan Dunham at around minus 115 against Olivier Aubin-Mercier.
All right, good stuff from the best MMA odds maker in the world, considered by a lot of people. Guys, this was the first show of MMA Weigh-In, UFC 223. We will be back with the next big UFC card. For Matt Holt, I'm Drew Martin. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.